Black Waitress comforts a lonely billionaire at dinner. What happened next shocked the restaurant. The restaurant was empty except for them. James Crawford sat in the corner booth of Meridian Restaurant, a 5-star establishment where he owned the building it occupied. His scotch was untouched. His Rolex glowed under the soft lighting. Everything about him screamed power, wealth, dominance. Everything except his eyes. "You know what's funny?" he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I can buy anything, literally anything, but I can't buy what you have." Jasmine, the waitress, paused mid-step. She'd been working this restaurant for 8 months, studying him for 6. She knew his patterns: Tuesdays alone, always the corner booth, always drinking but never quite drunk, always searching. "What do I have?" she asked softly, sitting down uninvited. The move was calculated, sympathetic, perfect. "You're here," James whispered. "You actually see me." "Nobody sees me anymore." She reached across the table and touched his hand. His whole body tensed, then released. He was starving for human contact, the kind money couldn't buy. "I'm so tired of being alone," he continued, his voice breaking. "I've got board meetings, investors, employees, but nobody knows me. Nobody wants to know me. They want my money, my deals, my connections." Jasmine nodded, her expression soft, compassionate. Inside she was counting, calculating, waiting. "There's something I've never told anyone," James said, leaning forward. "Something that would destroy everything if it got out. But I trust you. I don't know why, but I do." He pulled out his phone. "My entire empire runs through one account, one code, $42 billion, everything I've built, everything I've stolen." He stopped himself. "Everything I've earned. It's all here." He looked directly at her. "The access code is Blue 1981, my mother's name, the year she died. The only thing that mattered to me." He typed it, showed her the screen. "I'm giving you this because you're the only person who's ever made me feel human again. If something happens to me, if I ever fall, I want someone to know. I want you to know." Jasmine stared at the screen, her heart pounding. 6 months of work, 6 months of acting, and now the keys to everything. She squeezed his hand. "I've got you," she whispered. The waiter approached with dessert. Neither of them noticed. Drop a comment where you're watching from, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. 3 weeks earlier, Jasmine Williams walked into Meridian with a fake resume, a stolen social security number, and a photograph of James Crawford taped to the inside of her apartment closet. She'd been studying him for months. "You're hired," the manager said, barely glancing at her credentials. "We need someone for Tuesday nights. The billionaires don't tip, but they're consistent." Jasmine smiled. Consistent was perfect. Her first Tuesday, she watched from across the dining room. James Crawford sat alone in the corner booth, the same scotch, the same hollow expression. His Rolex caught the light. His suit cost more than her car. But his eyes were empty. She saw it immediately. Loneliness, real, crushing, desperate loneliness. That's when she knew the con would work. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" she asked, approaching his table on night 3. Her voice was soft, practiced, designed to make him feel heard. He looked up, surprised. "No, He paused. "Actually, yes. Sit down for a moment." She sat. Uninvited, intimate, perfect. "Do you ever feel like you're invisible?" he asked, staring at his drink. "Every day," she lied smoothly. "I'm a black woman working in a restaurant full of people who don't see me. I'm just the help." James flinched. "That's not what I meant. I'm sorry." "It's okay," she said, touching his arm briefly. "I understand. You feel invisible too, don't you? Even with all that." She gestured vaguely at his expensive watch, his tailored suit. He stared at her for a long moment. "Yeah," he whispered, "exactly that." Over the next 6 weeks, Jasmine became his confessor. Every Tuesday, he'd arrive at 7 p.m. She'd sit with him between courses. He'd talk. She'd listen, really listen, the way nobody else in his life ever had. "My board doesn't respect me," he confessed one night. "They think I'm just a trust fund kid who got lucky. They don't know I built this empire from nothing." Lie. His father built it. James inherited it at 23. But Jasmine nodded like she believed him, like he was the greatest entrepreneur alive. "My ex-wife left me for a yoga instructor," he said another night, his voice breaking. "She took half of everything and married him within 6 months. I have billions, but I couldn't keep my marriage together." Jasmine squeezed his hand. Her loss. She was documenting everything, every confession, every vulnerability, every detail that would matter later. She learned his patterns, his fears, his secrets. She learned that he'd embezzled from his own company, moved money through shell accounts to pay for affairs, vacations, blackmail. She learned that his board was investigating him. She learned that in 3 months, federal charges would be filed. She learned that he had $42 billion in offshore accounts that nobody knew about. Not his accountants, not his lawyers, not his family, just him. And now, just her. "I've never told anyone this," James said on week 7, his voice barely audible, "but I'm scared, really scared." "Of what?" Jasmine asked, her expression open, safe, trustworthy. "That I'm going to lose everything. That someone's going to find out what I've done and destroy me, that I deserve it." She leaned forward. "You don't deserve that. You deserve peace. You deserve someone who understands you." He reached across the table and grabbed her hand. "Do you? Do you understand me?" "Yes," she said, and meant it, but not in the way he thought. She understood him perfectly. She understood that he was weak, that he was terrified, that he was so desperate for human connection that he'd give his deepest secrets to a woman he'd known for 7 weeks. She understood that he was about to be arrested, that his empire was crumbling, that in 6 months he'd be in federal prison. And she understood that before any of that happened, she could drain him dry. On week 8, James didn't show up for his usual Tuesday reservation. Jasmine checked her phone obsessively. Nothing. She called the restaurant. "Has Mr. Crawford made a reservation?" "No," the manager said. "First time he's missed." Her heart raced. Had he discovered something? Had the investigation moved faster? Was he running? He arrived on Wednesday instead. "I had to see you," he said, pulling her into the back office before her shift even started. "I couldn't wait until Tuesday." "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice steady even though her mind was racing. "Everything's falling apart," he said, his hands were shaking. "The SEC is looking into my accounts. My lawyers called this morning. They think someone's been feeding information to the feds." He was unraveling. "What are you going to do?" she asked carefully. "I don't know. I'm thinking about running, moving everything overseas, disappearing." Jasmine's pulse quickened. If he ran before she got the codes, the whole con fell apart. "You could talk to me about it," she said softly. "Tell me everything. Sometimes it helps to say it out loud." He looked at her with such desperation, such raw need for someone to understand him, that she almost felt guilty. Almost. "There's one account," James whispered, looking around to make sure they were alone. "One place where I've put everything that matters, everything that can't be traced, $42 billion. He pulled out his phone. "If anything happens to me, if I have to run, I need someone to know about this, someone I trust." Jasmine held her breath. "I want to show you," he continued. "I want you to have the access code, just in case." She swallowed hard, keeping her expression soft and concerned. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said. "Tomorrow night, dinner, I'll tell you everything." Jasmine didn't sleep that night. She sat in her studio apartment in Harlem, the same apartment where her mother had raised 3 kids on a waitress salary, the same apartment where her mother had died 5 years ago, leaving her with nothing but debt and anger. She pulled out her laptop and opened the file. Project Crawford. 6 months of research, every article about his company, every photo from charity galas, every business deal he'd orchestrated, every lie he'd told the media about being a self-made billionaire. Her phone buzzed, a text from Chris, her partner in the con. "Chris, you ready for tomorrow?" Jasmine. "He's going to give me everything tonight." Chris. "Then we disappear." She closed the laptop and lay back on her bed. Tomorrow night, she'd be walking away with the financial access codes to $42 billion. By morning, she'd have already transferred $3 billion to their escape accounts in 5 different countries. James Crawford would wake up to nothing. At 2 p.m., Jasmine received a call from the Meridian manager. "Don't come in tomorrow," he said. "We're closing for a private event, VIP client, no regular staff." Her stomach dropped. A private event meant no witnesses, no other staff, no cameras except the ones in the dining room, which she'd already disabled last week with Chris's help. It was perfect. Too perfect. She called Chris immediately. "The manager just told me the restaurant's closing for a private event tomorrow," she said. "It's just going to be me and him." "That's not the plan," Chris said, his voice tight. "We're supposed to have backups, witnesses, security footage of him willingly giving you the codes." "What if this is better?" Jasmine said. "What if having no one there means he feels safe, means he gives me everything without hesitation?" Silence on the other end. "This is how it was supposed to happen," she continued. "Just me and him, private, intimate, vulnerable." "If something goes wrong," Chris started. "Nothing's going to go wrong," she cut him off, but her hands were shaking. That afternoon, Jasmine went to the bank. She'd opened an account 3 months ago, a dummy account under a fake name linked to her escape identity. The money was already wired in. $2 million. Enough to disappear if something went wrong, enough to start over in any country in the world. She looked at her reflection in the bank's glass doors. The woman staring back at her was a stranger. Not Jasmine Williams, the waitress, not the girl from Harlem whose mother had died broken. This was the woman she'd been training to become for 6 months. This was the con artist. "Can I help you?" the teller asked. "Just checking my balance," Jasmine said, smiling that smile, the one she'd perfected, the one that made men like James Crawford believe she actually cared. Balance, $2,000. She walked out of the bank and caught her reflection in a storefront window. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself. That's when she saw him, a man in a dark suit following her. She'd seen him before, 3 weeks ago, outside the restaurant, then again outside her apartment building. Federal agent. Her blood went cold. She kept walking, kept her pace steady, didn't react. She pulled out her phone and texted Chris in code. "Jasmine, we have a tail." Chris, "Are you sure?" Jasmine, 100%. Chris, "Abort, walk away, let him go." She stopped walking, let her phone drop to her side. Walk away? From $42 billion? From the con she'd been planning for 6 months? From finally getting everything she deserved? "No," she called James. "I need to see you," she said, her voice shaking, but not from fear, from excitement. "Today, not tomorrow. Today." "Jasmine, what's wrong?" His voice was immediately concerned, immediately hers. "I can't explain over the phone," she said, "but I need to see you. I need to know you're okay." "Where are you?" "Fifth Avenue, near your office building." "I'm coming down. Stay there." She hung up and looked behind her. The agent was still there, keeping distance, speaking into his collar. They were closing in on James. She could feel it. The SEC investigation, the federal charges, they were happening faster than she'd anticipated, which meant she had to move faster too. James emerged from the building 5 minutes later, his face pale with concern. He grabbed her hand. "What happened? Are you okay?" "I'm scared," she whispered, leaning into him. "I'm scared about what you told me, about everything falling apart." "Jasmine, I want to help you," she said, looking up at him with those eyes, the eyes that had been trained on him for 6 months. "I want to be the person you can trust. I want to be there for you." He pulled her close, right there on the sidewalk in front of his office building. "You already are," he said into her hair. "You already are." Behind them, the federal agent was taking photographs. That night, James called her again. "I moved up our dinner," he said. "Tonight, 9 p.m. Meridian, just us." Jasmine's heart pounded. "Tonight?" "I can't wait anymore," he said. "I need to give you the codes tonight. I need to know that someone I trust has access to everything in case something happens to me." She closed her eyes. "Tonight?" she repeated, her voice barely audible. "Unless you don't want to—" "No," she said quickly. "Tonight is perfect. Tonight is when I've been waiting for." But what she didn't tell him was that the federal agents were closing in. What she didn't tell him was that she'd seen the investigation files on James's computer. What she didn't tell him was that the SEC was planning to freeze his accounts tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. She had 12 hours. 12 hours to get the access codes, 12 hours to transfer the money, 12 hours to disappear before James Crawford's entire empire collapsed. And he had no idea that she was the reason it was collapsing, or that she was about to steal everything he had left. The clock read 8:47 p.m. Jasmine stood in the Meridian bathroom, staring at herself in the mirror. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. Her makeup was flawless. She looked like someone who cared. She looked like someone worthy of $42 billion. The restaurant was completely empty except for James, who sat waiting in their corner booth. The staff had been sent home. The doors were locked. It was just the two of them, predator and prey, though James had no idea which was which. She walked toward him slowly, letting him watch her approach. She'd worn the dress he loved, black, simple, elegant, the dress that made him feel like she was dressing up for him, the dress that made him believe she actually wanted to be here. "Hi," she said softly, sliding into the booth across from him. "Hi," he whispered back, and his voice was different, smaller, broken. "What's wrong?" she asked, reaching for his hand immediately, the practiced touch, the trained gesture. "Everything," he said. "My lawyers called again. The federal investigation is accelerating. They want to interview me tomorrow morning. They know about the offshore accounts." Jasmine's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression gentle, concerned, loving. "Did you tell them about the big account?" she asked carefully. "No," James said, shaking his head. "That one's hidden so deep that nobody can find it. Not even my accountants know about it. The access codes are the only way in." He looked directly at her. "And I'm going to give them to you." "Before I do," James said, "I need to tell you something. I need you to understand what you're about to become." He pulled out his phone and opened a document. $42 billion, he said, his voice hollow, "built on embezzlement, fraud, and lies. I'm not a self-made man, Jasmine. I'm a thief, a rich thief, but a thief." He turned the phone toward her. "My father built this empire through illegal weapons deals. When he died, I inherited it. I told the world I doubled it through innovation and business acumen. The truth is, I've been moving money through shell accounts to hide it from the IRS, from my board, from my ex-wife." Jasmine listened, her face a mask of sympathy. "There are 15 shell accounts," he continued. "Cayman Islands, Dubai, Singapore, Panama. Each one has a different access code, but there's a master code, one number that unlocks everything at once, one code that gives you full access to all 42 billion. He pulled out a piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "I've had this memorized for 10 years, he said. "It's the only place it's written down." He slid it across the table. "I'm giving this to you because I trust you, because you're the only person in the world who knows the real me, the broken me, the criminal me." Jasmine took the paper without looking at it. "James," she said, her voice trembling, but not from emotion. From the thrill of the hunt. "This is too much. I can't—" "You can," he interrupted, "and you will. Because I need someone to have this. I need someone to know that if I disappear tomorrow, if I go to prison, if I lose everything, at least one person on earth knows the truth." The waiter arrived with their appetizers. Jasmine had arranged for him to bring champagne, expensive, French, the kind James loved. She'd also arranged for it to contain a slight sedative. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make him drowsy, compliant, less likely to question what was happening. He poured 2 glasses. "To new beginnings," James said, raising his glass. Jasmine raised hers. "To truth," she said, and drank. James drank deeply. She watched as the liquid moved down his throat, as his body absorbed the sedative, as his eyes began to glaze slightly. "I feel better," he said, leaning back in the booth. "I feel like a weight has been lifted, like I'm finally free." She reached across the table and held his hand. "You are free," she said. "You're free because you finally told someone the truth." What she meant was, you're free because you're about to lose everything. "Jasmine," he said, squeezing her hand weakly, "I love you." The words hung in the air between them. She didn't blink, didn't hesitate, didn't let the moment falter. "I love you too," she said. And she meant it. But love and betrayal are sometimes the same thing. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to Chris. "I have it." Chris responded immediately. "Transfer the money. We move in 30 minutes. What was that? James asked, his eyes drooping slightly. Nothing, she said, putting the phone away. Just checking on my roommate. She'd already memorized the access code, already photographed it, already sent it to Chris' encrypted email, already set up the transfer protocols. All she had to do now was sit with him for 30 more minutes while Chris drained the accounts from his location in Brooklyn. All she had to do was pretend to care while watching him fall asleep. "I'm tired," James murmured, his head drooping toward the table. "I know," she said softly. "It's okay to rest. You're safe with me." That was the cruelest lie of all. She watched him slip deeper into sedation, his breathing becoming slower, his body becoming heavier. In 30 minutes, he'd wake up groggy and confused, with no memory of exactly how much he'd told her. In 30 minutes, Chris would confirm that all $42 billion had been transferred. In 30 minutes, Jasmine Williams, or whatever her real name was, would disappear. She pulled out the access code paper and read it one more time. Blue 1981, his mother's name, the year she died. The only thing that had ever mattered to him, and now it was the password to his complete destruction. She folded the paper carefully and placed it in her purse. Her phone buzzed, a text from Chris. 3B transferred, 7B transferred, 15B transferred, 30 more seconds. She looked at James across the table. His head was tilted back. His mouth was slightly open. His expensive suit was rumpled. He looked pathetic. He looked like everything she'd been working toward for 6 months. Her phone buzzed again. Complete. All 42B accounted for. 5 accounts activated in Singapore, Dubai, Cayman Islands, Panama, and Bali. You're a billionaire, Jasmine. Get out. She stood up slowly. She looked at James one more time, at the man who had given her his deepest secrets, his greatest vulnerabilities, his entire fortune, and she felt nothing. No guilt, no hesitation, no second thoughts, just cold, calculated satisfaction. She walked toward the exit, her phone already displaying a fake text message on the security camera feed, a message that would show she'd received an emergency call and had to leave immediately. James would wake up in an hour, wondering where she went. By then, she'd be on a plane. By then, the money would be irretrievable. By then, James Crawford would have nothing left but the memory of a woman named Jasmine who had loved him just enough to destroy him completely. Pause for a moment. Comment what you think should happen next and drop where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell. Your engagement keeps stories like this alive. As Jasmine reached the exit, the front door burst open. Federal agents in dark suits flooded into the restaurant, weapons drawn. "Jasmine Williams," one of them shouted, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and theft." She froze. Behind her, James was still unconscious in the booth. And standing at the doorway, tears streaming down his face, was Chris, her partner, her lover, her co-conspirator for 6 months. Except he wasn't standing with her. He was standing with the FBI. "I'm sorry," Chris said, his voice breaking, "but James Crawford wasn't the only one you betrayed. You betrayed me too. And I couldn't let you walk away with $42 billion that could have been ours." Jasmine's blood turned to ice. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I made a deal," Chris said. 20 years ago, James Crawford killed my sister. She was a cleaning lady in one of his buildings. She saw something she shouldn't have, and he killed her to keep her quiet. The case was never solved. He stepped closer. "I've been waiting 6 years for justice, Jasmine, and when you came to me with this con, I realized I finally had a way to bring him down. Not steal from him, expose him, give the FBI everything." The agents moved toward her. "The money," Chris continued, "never left his accounts. I faked the transfers. Everything you think you accomplished was a setup. The only thing you did was confirm his crimes for a federal investigation." Jasmine looked back at the booth where James was waking up. He was looking directly at her, and on his face was not confusion or hurt. It was relief. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering," the federal agent said, reading Jasmine her rights as he cuffed her wrists. She didn't resist, didn't fight, just stared at Chris with eyes full of betrayal and rage. "How long?" she asked him quietly. 6 months, Chris said, not meeting her gaze. "Since the day you came to me with the Crawford con, I went straight to the FBI." "You were supposed to love me," Jasmine whispered. I did love you, Chris said, finally looking at her. That's why I couldn't let you become a murderer. James stood up from the booth, still slightly groggy from the sedative, but fully aware, fully in control. The federal agents helped him to a chair, treating him with respect, deference, like a victim being rescued rather than a criminal being exposed. Mr. Crawford, the lead agent said, thank you for your cooperation. Without your testimony, we never would have caught her. Jasmine's mind was spinning. James cooperating, James testifying. James, the man whose entire fortune was built on embezzlement and fraud, was working with the FBI. It didn't make sense, until it did. Sit her down, James said calmly, gesturing to an agent. I want to talk to her. They placed Jasmine in a chair directly across from him, still cuffed. The agent stepped back, giving them space but staying close enough to intervene if needed. James leaned forward, and for the first time since she'd met him, his eyes were sharp, clear, intelligent, no trace of the lonely, desperate billionaire she'd been manipulating. Do you want to know what I've been? He asked quietly. Jasmine said nothing. For the past 6 months, I've been working with federal law enforcement, James continued. When Chris came to me with information about his sister's death, about how I allegedly killed her, I realized I had 2 choices: fight it in court for years or help them catch the people who were actually responsible. He stood up and walked closer to her. Chris's sister wasn't killed by me, James said. She was killed by a human trafficking ring that operated out of my building without my knowledge. 12 women disappeared over 3 years, 12 families destroyed, and the man who orchestrated it all was going to walk free because there was no evidence. I didn't, Jasmine started. Didn't what? James interrupted. Didn't know? Didn't care? Didn't realize that the con you were running wasn't actually targeting me? It was targeting you? James pulled out a folder and placed it on the table in front of her. Open it, he said. Jasmine didn't move. An agent opened it for her. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, and they all featured Jasmine, but not as a waitress, not as a grieving daughter of a dead mother, not as the woman she'd created over the past 6 months. They were photographs of her real identity. Sarah Freeman, wanted in 5 states for fraud, identity theft, and theft. Sarah Freeman, who had orchestrated cons against 37 people over the past decade. Sarah Freeman, whose real mother had died in prison for similar crimes. You're not who you said you were, James said, his voice cold. And your partner Chris knew that. When he came to me, he didn't come asking for justice for his sister. He came asking to infiltrate your organization, to find out who you were working with, to dismantle the entire operation. Jasmine's heart was pounding so hard she thought it would burst through her ribs. There is no 42 billion, James continued. The access code I gave you was fake. The transfer Chris confirmed to you was fake. Every single thing you thought you were stealing was a manufactured scenario designed to make you believe you'd succeeded, so you wouldn't run before we had enough evidence to arrest you. He stepped closer, his face cold. You were never conning me, Sarah. I was conning you. For 6 months, I played the loneliest, most vulnerable billionaire in New York. And you fell for it because you're a predator who only sees what you want to see. The federal charges are extensive, James said, sitting back down across from her. Wire fraud across state lines, identity fraud, attempted theft, conspiracy. But there's one more charge that I want to explain personally. He pulled out another document. 23 women, he said, his voice shaking with anger. 23 women who came to us after being victimized by someone using your identity. You've been impersonating victims of human trafficking, using their stories to manipulate men like me into trusting you. You've been stealing their voice, their trauma, their recovery. Jasmine tried to look away, but an agent grabbed her chin, forcing her to face him. One of those women was Chris's sister, James continued. She survived. She escaped the trafficking ring, and she was trying to rebuild her life when she discovered that someone had been using her name, her story, her pain to run cons against wealthy men. He leaned so close she could feel his breath. That woman is in a witness protection program now. She's testifying against you tomorrow morning, and when the jury hears what you've done, not just to me, but to her and the other 22 women, they're going to make sure you spend the rest of your life in federal prison. Jasmine's composure finally cracked. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know about the women. I was just—" "Stealing?" James finished. "Lying? Manipulating? Yes. You were doing all of those things, and you did them very well." He stood up and walked back to the booth, signaling to Chris. Chris approached slowly, his face a mixture of pain and resolution. "I loved you," he said to Jasmine. "Or I thought I did. But what I really loved was the idea of using you to get justice for my sister. And now that's done." He turned to leave, but Jasmine called out to him. "Chris, please," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't do this. We were supposed to disappear together. We were supposed to start over." "We were never going to disappear," Chris said without turning around. "I was always going to turn you in. The only question was whether I'd do it before or after you became successful enough to hurt more people." He walked toward the exit with the other federal agents. James watched her break down completely. No, more composure, no more calculated expressions, just raw, ugly desperation. "Are you satisfied?" she asked him, her voice hoarse. "You won. I'm arrested. I'm going to prison." "No," James said quietly. "I'm not satisfied. Because Sarah, the real justice isn't for me. It's for the women you impersonated. It's for Chris's sister. It's for everyone you've ever conned." He gestured to the agents. "Take her away." As they were leading her out, one of the federal agents whispered something in James's ear. His face went pale. "What is it?" an agent asked. "We found something in her apartment," the agent said. "Photographs, names, locations. There are more conspirators, at least 12 other people operating similar cons across the country, and they all report to someone called the Architect." James looked back at Jasmine, who was being led out in handcuffs. She smiled, actually smiled. "You only caught one piece of the puzzle," she called out as they dragged her away. "The Architect will still be out there, still running, still winning. You arrested me, but the game never ends." The federal agents exchanged nervous glances. One of them pulled James aside. "We need your help," the agent said. "We need you to wear a wire, work with us to infiltrate the larger organization, identify who the Architect is before they disappear." James looked at the empty booth where Jasmine had sat across from him, where she'd listened to his fake confessions, where she'd believed she was stealing his entire empire. "How long?" he asked. 6 months, maybe a year." James nodded. "I'll do it," he said, "but on one condition. I want Jasmine, or Sarah, or whoever she really is, to know that turning her in was just the beginning, that the real reckoning is still coming." 6 months later. The federal courthouse was packed. Sarah Freeman sat in the defendant's chair, her orange prison jumpsuit a stark contrast to the expensive black dress she'd worn at Meridian. Her face was gaunt, her eyes were hollow. She no longer looked like a con artist. She looked like what she actually was, a criminal facing consequences. The judge read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Jasmine, Sarah, whatever her real name was, didn't react. She'd been expecting this for months, but what she hadn't been expecting was what came next. The prosecution called its final witness. Chris's sister walked to the stand. Her name was Emily. She was 28 years old. She'd spent 3 years trapped in a human trafficking ring until James helped her escape. And she'd spent the past 18 months rebuilding her life, a life that Sarah Freeman had nearly destroyed by stealing her identity and her story. "Tell the court what this woman did to you," the prosecutor said, pointing at Sarah. Emily looked directly at Sarah. "She became me," Emily said, her voice steady. "Not just my name, my trauma, my recovery story. I was in a victim advocacy group trying to heal from what happened to me, and I discovered that someone had been using my name to manipulate men, to steal from them, to make my pain profitable." Sarah stared straight ahead, showing no emotion. "For months I thought about what that meant," Emily continued. "I thought about how violated I felt, how betrayed. And then the FBI told me what was really happening. They told me that James Crawford, the man she'd been trying to con, was actually working to bring her down, that he'd been pretending the whole time so they could arrest her and stop her from hurting anyone else." Emily took a breath. "And I realized something. I realized that James Crawford, the billionaire she thought she was conning, showed more compassion for victims like me than she ever could, because he gave up 6 months of his life to make sure she couldn't hurt us anymore. The judge sentenced Sarah to 15 years in federal prison. 15 years for fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and a dozen other charges. As the bailiffs were leading her away, she finally looked up, finally made eye contact with someone in the courtroom. Not with James. Not with James. With Emily. And in that moment, Sarah saw something in Emily's face that she'd spent her entire life unable to recognize. Genuine human strength. Not the manufactured kind, not the calculated kind. Real strength, the kind that comes from surviving something terrible and refusing to become terrible yourself. For the first time in her life, Sarah Freeman felt ashamed. Outside the courthouse, James stood with Chris and Emily. The media surrounded them, but security kept the reporters at a distance. "What happens now?" a journalist called out. "Now," James said, looking at Emily, "we build something better. Emily is starting a non-profit organization dedicated to helping trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. I'm providing funding. Chris is helping with operations. And we're using everything we learned from this case to identify other con artists targeting vulnerable people." He paused. Sarah Freeman wasn't an anomaly. She was part of a larger network, and we're committed to shutting down that network, one criminal at a time. Emily spoke next. What Sarah didn't understand was that she was playing a game she couldn't win, Emily said. Because real strength, the kind that actually matters, isn't about how much money you can steal or how many people you can manipulate. It's about how much you can give, how much you can help, how much you can heal. She looked directly at the cameras. If you've been victimized by someone like Sarah, there's help, there's hope, and there's a community of survivors ready to support you. She gave a website address, a support network that James had funded with $2 million of his own money. A year later. James was meeting with federal agents again, but this time the context was different. The investigation into the architect had expanded. They'd identified 12 members of the larger organization. They'd dismantled 3 separate con networks operating in 5 different states, and they were getting closer to identifying the architect, the mastermind who'd been orchestrating these schemes for over a decade. "We think the architect might be someone from Sarah's past," the lead agent said. "Someone who taught her how to con, someone who's been using her as a test case for larger, more sophisticated schemes." James nodded. "Let me wear the wire longer," he said. "I'm willing to go deeper, to meet with the other operatives, to get closer to the architect." The agent hesitated. "That's dangerous, Mr. Crawford. We don't know who we're dealing with. The architect could be—" "I know the risks," James interrupted, "but those women, all 23 of them whose identities were stolen, they deserve justice, and if I can help get that, then I'm going to do it." James had changed. The lonely billionaire who'd sat in that corner booth pretending to be vulnerable was gone. In his place was a man with purpose, a man who understood that real strength wasn't measured in dollar signs, but in how you use those dollars to help others. He'd spent the past year and a half working with federal law enforcement. He'd turned his entire empire into a force for good, funding victim advocacy groups, supporting survivor networks, using his resources to bring down criminals. The man Sarah Freeman had tried to con had become something far more powerful than any con artist could ever be. He'd become a force for justice. 2 years after Sarah's arrest, the operation was complete. The architect had been identified, a woman named Victoria Cross, who'd been running sophisticated con networks for over 20 years. She'd trained at least 40 different operatives, including Sarah Freeman, and she'd stolen over $3 billion from victims across the country. Victoria was arrested in Miami, trying to board a private jet to escape. When James saw the news, he felt something he hadn't expected. Relief. Not relief that he'd won, not relief that he'd been proven right, just relief that it was finally over, that the innocent people who'd been victimized by these networks could finally have some peace. He called Chris. "It's done," James said. "It's done," Chris agreed. "My sister is safe. The organization is dismantled. Victoria is going to prison." "What about Sarah?" James asked. "Still in federal prison," James said. serving her 15 years, eligible for parole in 10 with good behavior, but by all accounts she's not the same person anymore. Prison changed her, made her think about what she's done. James visited Sarah in federal prison 6 months later. He wasn't required to, wasn't asked to, just decided to go. She sat across from him, separated by plexiglass, a phone between them. "Why are you here?" she asked, surprised. "To tell you that I forgive you," James said. Simply. Sarah's eyes widened. "You don't have to forgive me," she said. "I tried to steal everything from you." "I know," James said, "but forgiveness isn't about whether you deserve it. It's about whether I need to give it to move forward. And I do." He leaned closer to the phone. "What you did was wrong. You're going to spend years in this prison, and that's justice. But I hope that while you're here, you'll think about who you could become if you chose to change. Real change, not con artist change, not manufactured change, genuine transformation." Sarah had tears streaming down her face. "I don't deserve your kindness," she whispered. "You don't," James agreed, "but Emily deserves it, and all the other women whose identities you stole deserve it. So that's who I'm doing this for." As James walked out of the federal prison, he thought about the man he'd been 2 years ago, the lonely billionaire sitting in a corner booth, pretending to be vulnerable so he could catch a predator. That man had learned something crucial. Vulnerability wasn't weakness. Connection wasn't naivety. And the greatest strength wasn't in what you could take from the world, but in what you could give. He'd given 2 years to law enforcement, given millions to victim advocacy, given his time, his resources, his credibility to make sure that predators like Sarah Freeman and Victoria Cross couldn't hurt anyone else. And in doing so, he'd found something he never could have stolen, manipulated, or purchased. He'd found purpose. He'd found meaning. He'd found redemption. The empty billionaire had finally become whole. If this story touched you, leave a comment sharing where you're watching from and the lesson you learned. Subscribe for more stories that remind us that justice is possible, redemption is real, and the strongest among us are often those who choose compassion over vengeance. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story.